Yeah. Like the old thing.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's 3 o'clock or a little bit after, so I think I'll start this. There are people online on the webinar already, and so we'll just get into this. Welcome to the Sitka Sedge Dike Modification 60% Design Update Town Hall. And I just wanted to go over a few basics about the meeting before we get started here. This meeting is being recorded, so it's live on webinar. There's a camera over here and the owl and another camera. So we're all live and on the internet, and this will be on YouTube forevermore. So with that, I'll get into the meeting purpose here. So first of all, we want to summarize how we got to now, what brought us to this point in history and where we are with current planning. And then we want to give an update on the current status of design and planning. Then discuss the next steps for the project, what's to come and what the timeline looks like, and then provide an opportunity for people to ask questions and give comments. So the agenda will start off with some panelist introductions, and one of our panelists is not here yet because of an accident on Highway 6. He'll be coming soon, maybe by the time I finish the first presentation. Then after the introductions of our project team, I will give a summary of the project history going back to 2014. And then Hunter White, who is not yet here, will give a presentation on the 60% design status for the setback dike and the Sand Lake Road crossings. And then Krister will give an update on the grants that we're looking at to potentially implement this in the near future. And then lastly, we'll open it up for questions and answers. And I would ask that people hold their comments until we've gotten through all the slides. We have about 60 slides, so it'll take us, about an hour to get through that content. And there'll be quite a bit of time at the end there for everybody to ask any questions that they might have. So with that, I will introduce myself. Sorry, I should have started with that. I'm Noel Batchelor. I'm the State Parks Central Natural Resource Specialist, ecologist. I've been involved with this project for about 11 years now, since the acquisition of the property. So I've come to see myself as sort of the institutional memory or the historian of this project. So hence, that's why I'm giving the summary of the background and the history of the project and how we got to here. And I will pass it on now to our project team.
I'm Krister LeBrecq. I'll refer to the technical part of it and I'm really for about 2 years.
Hi, I'm Tracy Johnson. I'm a construction product feature of Women's Parks.
Hello, everybody. Jason Elkins. I'm the park manager at Take Lookout Unit, including Sitka Sedge Town Hall. I'm Chris Lady. I'm the 45.
Great, is everyone? And now, without further ado, what's that? Online here. Let me try this microphone. See if you can hear that. What's that? Speak. Okay, I'm saying something. Testing, testing. Okay. All right. All right, sorry, everyone. Mandatory technical difficulties. I never get through one of these meetings without them. I don't see any volume control. Oh, wait, I know it's over here on the wall. All microphones are at maximum now. Hopefully that works. Okay, to launch into the history and background now. I'll set the stage with the location. I'm sure everyone here in the room is familiar with the property, and sorry to have to go over all of this background again for those of you that have been to many of our meetings in the past, but there may be people in the webinar who have not yet heard the backstory here. The red boundary on the map is the park boundary. This black line here is the 1930s era existing dike, Belts Dike, which has a tide gate right here. There are three main streams that enter the marsh behind that dike. Reneke Creek is the northernmost. Then we have Belts Creek and then No Name Creek, which that's not its real name, but that's what we've been calling it for the purposes of this project. No Name Creek flows through what we're calling East Marsh, again, not a proper name. And Sand Lake Road Ditch is here, and the Tierra del Mar Ditch. Tierra del Mar, the community, is here just to the south of the state park boundary. And the purpose and need for this project. So as many of you are aware, this is a very old dike. It's from the 1930s. It's not very tall. It has one undersized tide gate. It's a 4x4 box culvert. The flap on that tide gate has no planks on it anymore. So water blasts through this thing unimpeded. The water velocity running through there is kind of like a fire hose. It's just really high velocity, causes a lot of eddying and erosion. And as you can see in the inset photo that's on the bottom of this slide, the interior of the dike has eroded quite a bit. And Jason just showed me a photo today of what it looks like more recently. It has eroded even more in the last year or two since this photo was taken. The current box culvert being only a 4x4 opening to drain an area of more than 70 acres of marsh habitat is dramatically undersized. And I like to describe this as something like an hourglass. This very small hole through the dike backs up water either way. It's very resistant to flow. So what that means is it takes a long time for water to come in, but it also takes a very long time for that water to go back out again. And that'll be demonstrated in a video simulation here a couple slides ahead. Because of this fire hose velocity that we're seeing through this box culvert, there's way too much speed there for juvenile fish to be able to swim through. And of course, the habitat behind the dike is and was formerly very good salmon and trout habitat. The current dike also, and this is a very important feature, is only about 12 feet tall at its low point. And the highest tide that we've observed in the course of this study is about 12 feet. So it is not resistant to any amount of sea level rise. It'll be overtopped very soon if there's any amount of sea level rise. So these things all together paint a picture of this dike just not being up to the job anymore. And we need to do something to fix the situation. This video will demonstrate this fire hose effect. You can see water here flowing in through the box culvert. There should be none. A functioning tide gate would have no water flowing this direction. And this amount of velocity that we're seeing going through here right now is very high, too much for fish, and it's also causing an awful lot of erosion to either side of the box culvert and its wing walls. And so what have we done so far? What's the timeline here? This project has been investigated since about September of 2014, when State Parks acquired this property. And there have been many twists and turns. I'm not going to read through this whole slide, but let's just summarize it to say that we did a bunch of analyses of biology, recreation, cultural resources, aesthetic resources, recreational usage, et cetera, up until about 2017 with the publication of the master plan. And then we really understood that this dike situation was a really big thing. We had to do a lot more analysis of hydrology, surface water hydrology, groundwater hydrology, and we embarked on several years of very detailed hydrological analysis, including the park and Tierra del Mar to the south. In 2019, when those hydrological studies were completed, we had a tech team that convened to review the alternatives that were on the table at the time and sort of compare and contrast and think about what the pros and cons were for each of these alternatives. Then in 2020, this was presented to Tillamook County Commissioners and the State Parks Commission, State Parks leadership, and eventually we landed on a setback dike as the preferred alternative, the alternative that seemed to hit the majority of the goals for the property and for stewardship of both our relationship with our neighbors and for the property as a whole. We joined up with Tillamook Estuaries Partnership in 2020, and then ESA began working on the analysis of the setback dike in 2022, culminating in where we are today at 60% design. Over the period of review that we're looking at here, we've had at least 20 stakeholder meetings. It's getting to the point where it's hard to track the number over all of these years, but maybe 23, 24 meetings. We've had news releases. We have a website that holds all of the archives for this project, including the hydrological studies from 2017, 2018, 2019, tech team results, et cetera. We have an email list to which I'm sure many or most of you have subscribed. And we have had meetings with adjacent landowners and ongoing communication and collaboration with the Tierra del Mar Community Association and interested landowners. So what are the alternatives that we've assessed over the years? The top left here shows the no action alternative. This is the do nothing reference condition. What would happen if we did nothing at all? And this is not acceptable. So this is just a bookend thing. It's a point of comparison with other alternatives. Dike breach is something that's also a bookend. It doesn't meet our project goals, but it's there as a reference condition. The two action alternatives that have really been analyzed over the years are replacing the existing tide gates or the existing dike's tide gate with a modern muted tidal regulator system. And we analyzed different closure settings. So I'll get into that in a future slide. And then last of all, and the selected alternative was the setback dike alternative, which is to build a taller, stronger dike further to the south and to open the existing dike to allow unfettered fish passage and estuarine restoration in the area north of the setback dike. This slide is just really to demonstrate that we went through a lot of analysis over the years to show what the effects would be with all of these different alternatives. So in the upper left here, we see the existing condition. This is what we see now. And then we tested a 7-foot tide gate closure in a modern tide gate in the existing dike, 8 foot, 9 foot, 10 foot. We looked at the reference condition, which you could call a breach, or maybe you would refer to it as before 1930s. This would be the historic condition that existed here before the dike was ever built. And then the setback dike, which is our preferred and current alternative that we're pursuing. This slide is one of many that assessed similar metrics for the property, but what this one in particular is showing is an average February, how many days per month would you expect to see tidal surface water at any point? And these colors represent the number of days that you would see tidal surface water under each of these alternatives. And as you can see, in the setback alternative, the amount of surface water near Tierra del Mar is at its minimum. That's the alternative that is the least impactful to and beneficial to Tierra del Mar. So this video, if I can get it to run, this shows it all in sort of a graphical movie format, and I'll stop it here to set the stage. The upper left frame is the existing condition. That's what's out there today. Then we have a modern tide gate in the existing dike as the second frame here, the breach or pre-1930s dike scenario, and a setback dike, what we're analyzing now. The graph down at the bottom shows the height of surface water under each of these areas. So the existing dike is the green line. The breach is this tallest one. The modern tide gate in the existing dike is the, I guess you would call it an orange color. And then the behind set dike color is sort of more of a brown color here. The blue is a rainfall event. And these tides are about 10 feet. So they're big tides, they're king tides. So what we do here is we just allow this to run. The line through the middle of the video here is showing the point in time that's represented in the snapshots above. And the point to notice here is that the existing condition drains out very slowly compared to all of the other alternatives. And this video takes a while, so I'm going to move it forward into this significant storm event. This is not a 100-year event, but it's a significant event. And you'll see that the tides come in under all scenarios, and under the existing condition with this amount of rainfall, it essentially never goes out under the existing condition. It stays in for tide cycle after tide cycle, and the other alternatives all drain out really quickly. Now I'll move it ahead to a real gully washer storm. This is a 100-year storm event. So off the charts type of rainfall with the highest tide we've ever observed, about a 12-foot tide. And what we see here is what you would expect from the previous segment with a lesser tide. But you see that the tide comes in, it stays in for days on end under the existing condition, whereas it drains out quickly under the other alternatives. And of note here is that the setback dike outperforms the modern tide gate with an 8-foot closure setting. It drains out more quickly because not as much tide water is stored or allowed to get in close to Tierra del Mar. And you see here, these private properties, these are tax lots here, these private properties in this area receive sustained inundation under the existing condition, and they're all drained out very efficiently under either the modern tide gate scenario or the setback dike scenario. Setback dike performs the best. And so OPRD put together some sideboards. Oregon Parks and Recreation Department is OPRD. And these are the 5 guiding principles to selection of an alternative here. The first one is that the design should result in virtually no increase in tidewater, stormwater, or elevated groundwater on private properties in Tierra del Mar. Number 2 is the design should result in meaningful improvements to estuary and fish habitats in the area inside the existing dike. The design should restore fish passage to the mouths of Reneke and Belts Creeks. Recreation access should continue. We still want people to get into the marsh. We want people to get across the marsh and be able to get out to the beach and out to the dunes and experience the park. And the design should route Reneke Creek to the marsh in a natural channel rather than, like right now, it's running in a roadside ditch. So we want a natural channel for Reneke Creek that has the proper fish passage and fish habitat. So pros and cons for each of the alternatives that led up to the eventual decision. The no action alternative has no pros. It's the worst case scenario. So I'm not even going to talk about that one. It doesn't meet OPRD's stated goals at all. The dike breach scenario also does not meet OPRD's stated goals because it increases tide water on private properties. It also is, well, it has the highest estuarine restoration value. There's more estuarine restoration, there's more fish passage, and more fish habitat there, but the cons outweigh the pros, and so it is out. The modern tide gates in the existing dike, this is sort of middle of the road. It has some good effects on habitat, but it's not as good as the setback dike. And it also is not resilient to sea level rise. The existing dike, if you slap a new tide gate in there, yeah, it'll do what it's meant to do until sea level rise overtops it. So the taller, stronger dike of the setback dike is the alternative that is sort of the sweet spot between providing habitat, fish passage, and protection. Oops, skipped one there. So in 2020, as I said before, we presented all of this analysis to the Tillamook County Commissioners, the public, the Oregon Parks and Recreation Commission, and OPRD leadership. And the decision was made to pursue the setback dike as the preferred alternative. We released a decision memorandum and a frequently asked question document, which is still on our website, about that decision. And in, I think it was June of 2020, we received a letter of support for that from the Tierra del Mar Community Association. Further study of the setback dike took a little bit of a hiatus in 2020 because of COVID and the loss of funding. But we, during that time, forged a strong relationship with Tillamook Estuaries Partnership, who are able to apply for grants that we can't, and they have a very strong demonstrated ability to work on this type of project, strong experience working on tidal restoration. So they were able to get a grant in 2022 to hire an environmental science associates to continue with the design of the setback dike and figure out exactly where to put it and what the design criteria would be. So the scope of work from 2022 was to zero in on where exactly that setback dike should be placed, and then to also figure out where to breach the existing dike, or should it be one breach? Should it be multiple breaches? Should it be total dike removal? Should it, just investigating all the options there. And then what comes along with that is, how do you continue to provide recreational access? Do you put bridges across any openings in the existing dike, or do you use something like a boardwalk? So all of these things were analyzed in 2022, 2023. And also a side study that was done by ESA at that time was studying the surface water accumulation in Tierra del Mar, looking at the topography out there and what is inhibiting proper drainage of the community. And what this very colorful map is showing is elevations. And the blue areas that you see in here, these spots are low spots that don't really have an outlet. There's no positive drainage or ditches, etc., to allow the water to get out to Sand Lake Road efficiently. And then this orange and red here is kind of high ground that kind of dams water into to an extent. I'm not going to talk much about this, and this isn't the subject of our discussion today, but this study was done and could be picked up to move further along if the community or partners wanted to pursue that. So the early stage of figuring out where to put the setback dike is what I've been calling tapping on the wall to find the stud. You don't know right offhand where exactly to put this thing without a little bit of trial. You have to say, okay, what if we put it here? What would the effects be? And what we're looking for here is minimizing the footprint of the dike so that we're doing less damage to the marsh, and then also providing enough storage capacity for stormwater behind that dike during periods when the tide gates on the setback dike would be closed. So during high tide, the tide gate in the setback dike will be closed, and whatever stormwater is flowing down No Name Creek, Sand Lake Road, and Tierra del Mar Ditch, that water will have to be stored until that tide gate can open again when the tide goes out. So the dike has to be far enough north that it has enough land to store the water. And then we want to also not just put it so far north that it blocks access to Belts Creek and dissects the habitat. So what that analysis determined was that alternative one, which was the northernmost position of the setback dike, which roughly corresponds to what we analyzed in those videos that I showed a little bit ago. That was the only alternative that met all of OPRD's stated goals and provided the storage capacity that was needed for stormwater. And it provides it well. The water would be decreased on the boundary of Sitka Sedge. So private properties in the vicinity of Sitka Sedge would experience less water than they currently do under this scenario. So what about habitat? What does this do? We're going to be plunking down this setback dike in the middle of the marsh. So that setback dike is 1.5 acres of fill in the middle of the existing marsh. It is offset, that impact is offset by the fact that we're restoring 70 acres in front of that setback dike to natural estuarine habitat with perfect fish habitat, with good estuarine vegetation and function. It also completely restores fish passage to Reneke and Belts Creeks completely unimpeded. So there's a trade-off there. The sediment accretion is the last thing I wanted to say on this slide. We did a little bit of analysis and assessment of what happens when you don't allow enough sediment to come in from the Sand Lake estuary. And a theory out there that seems to be borne out by evidence in other estuaries around Oregon is that if you allow natural tidal flow into a marsh, the sediment, the muck that drops out of the water when you're at slack tide, that builds up in layers over time. And what that can do in a sea level rise situation is allow the marsh to keep pace with sea level rise. If you don't allow enough sediment to come in, it's possible that the marsh would become less vegetated over time or become open water habitat. So we don't have any real analysis of this, but it's borne out by other reference sites in other places around the state. So it's something to think about. In terms of effects on habitat, the slide on the left here, or the inset photo on the left, shows the existing habitat in 2016 when we did the mapping. And what you'll see there is that the light green is freshwater marsh and the pink is high salt marsh. Those get pushed out towards the edges under the setback dike scenario, and we see a dramatic increase in low salt marsh. Low salt marsh is a very important juvenile rearing habitat for salmon. And so this is completely something that we would be interested in for fish habitat purposes. South of the setback dike, what we're seeing is that there's no tidal influence in this yellow area. And so it's a kind of a net drying effect to the area behind the setback dike. Effects on private property. This is super important to OPRD and to the group over the years as we've engaged with stakeholders. The summary is generally that the setback dike improves the situation with surface water around here at Del Mar relative to either the existing condition or the pre-dike conditions. As you can see in this image to the bottom here, which is again this February, this kind of average February, that shows the number of days that you would expect to see tidal surface water on any particular spot. There's tidal surface water in private properties under these scenarios on an average February, but not under the setback dike scenario. This effect would also extend to protecting vehicle passage along Sand Lake Road, which overtops right in this vicinity. So in a pre-dike situation or in the existing condition, water can flow over that road, but under a setback dike scenario, that road is protected. So with that summary of where we've been, here are the next steps. Geotechnical assessment is coming very soon inside the marsh, within a matter of weeks, I believe. And that will allow continued design from the current stage of 60% to 100%. 100% designs are expected in the spring of 2026, so something like 6 to 8 months from now. Permit applications are already underway for implementation. We've been talking with permit agents, with regulators, And those permits are moving along. They'll be in process for a number of months to come. We'll need new grants, and Krista will talk a little bit about the implementation money situation. But we will need that to be able to move forward. If everything goes smoothly, we could be constructing the setback dike in the summer of 2026. So within 9 months, there could be setbacks depending on permits and funding, et cetera. But if all goes according to plan, that's where we would be. And with that, I've finished that summary, and I'll hand it over to Hunter, who's going to give us the 60% details. Yeah. Hunter, you want to introduce yourself too?
Hi, everybody. Good to see many of you again. My name is Hunter White. I'm a civil and water resources engineer with ESA. It's an Environmental Science Associates. And I've been working on this project for a number of years now, dating back to 2019 with the hydrologic study and all the steps in between as we've been moving towards design and ultimately towards construction. Just quickly too, I'll say that I represent a whole team of engineers, scientists, landscape architects, and biologists, permitting staff, as well as subconsultants. David Evans and Associates are structural and roadway engineers, and we have a geotechnical engineer with Shannon and Wilson. So really a large team of professionals working on this project and all the details involved. So now, Noel gave a great background of how we got to this point. And at this point in the process, we are developing construction documents. What I'll be showing you here today is a lot of views from our 60% design drawings. And so, these are set up for the main purpose of construction drawings, and some of the labels are a little bit hard to read, but I'll point out what we're looking at. This is an overview of the site, and at the far north end or the upper end there, you can see the location where we'll be breaching and opening up the dike with a new channel. As Noel mentioned, we need to provide continued recreational access, and so we'll be spanning that breach with a 140-foot span pedestrian bridge. There at the far south end or the bottom of the frame there, you can see the setback dike itself, and slightly different alignment than we've seen in some of the other images where it just cuts straight across the marsh, and I'll explain what our thinking is and how we've refined that alignment. All throughout the marsh here, you can see these blue sinuous squiggly lines are new tidal channels. And really what we're trying to do is recreate the conditions that would have existed prior to the diking, the draining, ditch excavation, and filling of the original tidal channels that would have existed prior to the 1930s. And so you'll see, and I'll zoom in and talk a little bit more about that, just the additional tidal channels that we're planning to create and filling some of the linear drainage ditches that were excavated. And then on the right side there, kind of in the right center there, that's the Reneke Creek area. And we are working in partnership with Tillamook County Public Works to replace the undersized culvert there, put in a new bridge that will provide much better fish passage, as well as raising up a portion of that roadway to prevent roadway overtopping, and in a location that does overtop frequently and causes a lot of maintenance problems for the county. So we'll zoom in on each one of these here as we move forward. So, really, again, with all of this, we're trying to the extent feasible to recreate the conditions before these modifications occurred of the diking and draining of the land. This 1939 aerial is as far back as we can look with air photos, and I think I'll be zooming in on some of these, but even in 1939, that exists, the dike, Belts Dike, was already constructed. You'll start to see some of the tidal channels being filled in and some of the ditching that occurred, but really just looking back as far as we can. And again, on the right there, it's zooming in on that Reneke Creek area where you can see these sinuous tidal channels that would have existed and likely carried a good portion of Renicky Creek's flow to the marsh and to Sand Lake. Here zooming in on the dike and again, kind of looking at where we will plan to breach and put in the new pedestrian bridge. And in the yellow arrow, that's where the existing drainage structure is, the 4 foot by 4 foot box culvert with a tide gate that's no longer functional, or it's completely missing now. These 3 arrows in the middle, these are kind of where we would see the largest amount of water moving through this area, kind of connecting into the large channel forms that were present in 1939 and actually do still exist today. So here looking at a more recent air photo, and again, the yellow arrow where the existing culvert and tide gate are, and then this blue arrow is where we've decided that it makes the most sense to breach, which you can see it is really connecting into the most prominent channels, both in that previous air photo as well as, again, that still do exist today. If you stand in this spot, especially at low tide, and look out in either direction, you can see this channel that we're trying to reconnect. So here's zooming in again in our 60% design with the breach. Essentially excavating a new channel through this area, again, connecting to those existing channels inside and out. And I'll just zoom in a little bit here on showing you a view of the 140-foot span breach, or excuse me, pedestrian bridge. I think I saw you trying to take a picture, and I'll go ahead and give you another view of that. What you're seeing here, in addition to reconnecting the flow path of these main most prominent channels, we're also filling the linear drainage ditches that are at the base of the existing dike. And the dike is going to remain for the most part. The Belts Dike Trail is there. We will be making a few improvements to the trail itself and raising up a low point. Here on the right side, you can see where the existing culvert is that we'll be removing and then reconstructing the embankment there. It's, I think in some of the images Noel showed, there's a lot of erosion that's occurred around that existing box culvert. And so as we remove that structure, we'll reconstruct the embankment so that it maintains access on that embankment long into the future. We're also kind of redirecting some of the flows rather than having some of this water flowing parallel to the dike in these drainage ditches and then trying to take a hard, right turn or a, perpendicular turn through the opening. We're kind of lining up the flows to more effectively go through the new bridge opening and reduce erosion potential. We're also adding large wood structures, which have dual purpose. They'll be stabilizing the banks in those locations as well as providing fish habitat. So this is zooming in on the breach itself, and what we see here is a plan and profile view. So again, this 140-foot wide breach and a channel that's being constructed there, and then a prefabricated 140-foot span pedestrian bridge going over that. Again, we're working with David Evans, structural engineers. They're designing the bridge abutments, and we're planning for a prefabricated bridge system to be installed on that. Noel mentioned we have some upcoming geotechnical investigation work on the horizon, but we have also done a lot of geotechnical investigations and engineering already, particularly at this pedestrian bridge, at the Renicky Creek Bridge, and location where the setback dike will tie into Sand Lake Road. We have done a lot of geotechnical investigation already that's being used to inform the 60% design. And we do have a little bit more coming up specifically in the marsh at the proposed setback dike and tide gate structure. So here you can see, and I won't get into a lot of the details of how we sized this opening. Certainly can if folks are interested, but essentially we wanted to make this opening large enough that it's passing water efficiently, that the velocities will stay low, that it won't have a tendency to erode, so that we really minimize the amount of stabilization, armoring, or riprap, for example, that we would need to install beneath the bridge. And so this 140-foot span was a good middle ground to land on, where we're kind of maximizing the size of bridge that we can put in an economical way, and then also providing a large enough opening that won't be prone to erosion. and also keeps velocities low for fish swimming through. So this is a view of an example bridge that might be similar to what we end up with at Sitka Sedge. This is a continental truss bridge from Contect, and the view at the top there is actually from the 60% design drawings from David Evans' plans. And again, this is an example of what that could look like. Here's another one that's quite similar, and it's located in the Lewis and Clark National Historical Park near Warrenton and Astoria area on the Lewis and Clark River. This is a smaller creek draining in called Colwart Creek that this bridge actually goes over. But again, this one actually is right around that same span length as well. And with those larger spans, the bridge structure itself has to get bigger and taller as well. So you can see the side rails there coming up pretty high, and that's really because of the structure that's required to achieve that span. Pause for a drink. So now we'll move on to the setback dike itself. And, as I mentioned, we've kind of refined the alignment of the setback dike for a few different reasons. And what you see here, kind of right in the center, kind of where our channels fork out there, that's the existing beaver dam that has become it's a really well-known feature on this site. It's a persistent feature that actually backs water up behind it towards Tierra del Mar. The elevation of that beaver dam is at about 8 feet, and that'll come into play here in a moment. And so we wanted to locate the setback dike so it's downstream or north of that beaver dam and gives a little bit of breathing room so we're not right on top of that beaver dam. We're tying in on the west side here into the forested dune area. You're seeing a vehicular turnaround there so that we also have a new tide gate structure right in the center, and we will need to provide continued access onto the dike and out to the tide gate structure for maintenance. And so we've got a couple of access features here, including the turnaround that's required. There is some unavoidable tree removals or tree impacts, but we have, done a thorough tree survey. We've kind of assessed all of the trees in the area, and we're protecting a number of them, a number of high value trees, particularly one you see right at the kind of the corner there circled in that black line. That's a really, really large multi-trunk spruce tree that we made an effort to preserve. As we go over to the east, and originally, like I said, we had an alignment that was a little bit further to the south on the beaver dam, essentially, and it cut straight across the marsh. And where it would have tied into Sand Lake Road, if you're familiar with it and driving up Sand Lake Road there, it really starts to rise up. And so I'll switch here now to similar view, but another plan and profile view. And you can see there on the right side where what you're looking at in the bottom is a elevation view or a profile of the existing marsh surface down there in the dashed line, and the top of the new setback dike here in the solid black line. And you can see on the east end there, it has to ramp up and meet the roadway. And so bringing the setback dike tie in to the south a ways made it easier to tie in to Sand Lake Road without as much of a big ramp. Actually reduced the amount of fill footprint that was required. And also there was a kind of a portion of the marsh here. While a lot of the vegetation out there is in really good condition, there is a pocket of lower quality vegetation and reed canary grass that we are essentially aligning the dike with as well. So multiple reasons why that was beneficial. Improved sightline distances on the roadway. So for maintenance vehicles turning in and out of that driveway, this location is a lot better and a lot safer. And we did also repeat the modeling, the hydraulic modeling, with this exact setback dike alignment, this exact configuration, and showed that it performs exactly the same as alternative one that we evaluated in the larger alternatives analysis process. So again, we can kind of get into more if folks have questions. Another feature that you'll see here is rather than building the new tide gate structure right on the existing channel. We've located the new structure just off of that channel so that we can actually build the structure and maintain flows in that existing channel during construction. So it helps with logistics of construction, water management. This is going to take a couple of years to build because of the amounts of settlement that are going to occur. And so we wanted to make sure we can have that channel functional and flowing while we, through those multiple years of construction and building the structure. We're also incorporating 2 backup culverts. And so in addition to the large tide gate structure, that's about 12, would be a 12-foot wide box culvert. We're putting in 2 36-inch diameter pipes as well. And, these are intended to provide a little bit of extra drainage capacity, all the time when flows are high and, when there's a lot of stormwater coming off of Tierra del Mar, but also in the event that the tide gate structure were to be blocked for some reason, these backup culverts would activate and drain that water off. They will have just traditional flap gates on the front, so tide gates. These will also have tide gates on them so that, again, the high tides will not pass through and into the southern end of the marsh and towards Tierra del Mar. But again, just another pathway for water to exit and escape, further reducing water levels near Tierra del Mar compared to the existing condition, as Noel described. This is a zoom in on the tide gate structure itself, and we've tilted the view here, so north is to the left here. And again, as you can see, this is, we didn't add the blue lines to the channels, but here's a little bit closer of a view of, again, our location of the new tide gate structure off of the existing channel, its relation to the beaver dam. And after the tide gate is completed, then we will actually realign the channels. And, with a lot of the other channel work that we're doing here, we're adding a lot of sinuosity, curviness to these channels to make them function more naturally. And this, effectively plays into that same remeandering goal as well. I'll get into a view here just of kind of what the tide gate structure will look like and some similar structures. But first, I'll also just say that, Noel's talking about these muted tidal regulator systems with a water level setting. And these systems are adjustable, but we're proposing an 8-foot setting, water level setting. And so effectively, the system will allow water, it will keep the tide gates open until the inboard water level reaches 8 feet, and then it will allow those tide gates to close. And I guess I'll move through again, just an example of what it will look like. And you can see on the right, or excuse me, on the left here, the front side of the structure with the tide gate, it'll be a side hinged tide gate, 8 feet tall by 10 feet wide. So pretty large gate. And then on the interior side, this is a mechanical float and counterweight system. And this next slide here will just quickly run through for folks that aren't familiar with this type of system, how it functions. So at the top here, we see when the water is low, the float on the right side is down and it props this gate open. So the gate is open during low water moments. As water rises, and in the middle here, you can see water's moved up a little bit. It's not quite, flooding out the pasture, which is often what these systems are intended for. And in our case, it's very similar. The beaver dam is effectively at this 8-foot elevation. The marsh plain behind it is right about that 8-foot elevation. And so our system will function so that we'll let water in until it almost reaches that pasture elevation and almost reaches the top of the beaver dam. And then the mechanical system will allow that gate to close. And then as the outboard water level rises, the area behind or south of the setback dike the water level will stay low. And that would be kind of normal tidal operations. When there is a big storm coming down the system, you'll start with this condition here that you see at the bottom. And then as water fills, comes rainfall, fills the basin behind the setback dike, that area behind it will rise. And through the modeling that we've conducted, we've located the setback dike so that there's plenty of room, plenty of storage volume for that water level to rise before it would overtop Sand Lake Road, reach the private properties in Tierra del Mar, and again, generate lower water levels than are experienced under existing conditions. So in addition, some of the other just habitat enhancements that we're proposing for the project are, again, as I mentioned, filling some of these linear drainage ditches that were excavated for the sole purpose of draining the land fast. For the area that we're reconnecting, we really want to maximize the habitat value. And again, what you see here in these blue squiggly lines are really trying to mimic what would have been here before, and matching kind of the plan form, the sinuosity, and the sizing of tidal channels that would occupy this area. We'll show, again, as we move south in the marsh, interacting with the setback dike. Again, there's kind of a whole network of proposed channels that we plan to excavate while filling the linear drainage ditches. These are just a couple of examples of similar natural tidal channels and the shapes that you see out there. This is actually just in the north end of the Sand Lake estuary. So very close by, an area that wasn't ditched and drained, and the natural tidal channel forms are still there. As you can see, they kind of radiate out from a central trunk line and then branch out like a tree, essentially, branches and trunks coming off of a tree. Some of these areas end up having really high channel density, a lot of channels per acre, and that's one of our goals here. Reasons why we want to excavate more channels is to improve or increase the tidal channel density to bring it closer to a natural tidal marsh condition. Here are a few examples of wood structures from our plans, from our drawings, and here's a couple of examples from a project down near Florence, where these are newly excavated tidal channels. In fact, these channels here were excavated just a few weeks ago, and so you can see, we do have to get equipment in there into the marsh to dig these channels, and it can be pretty impactful. But with specialized low ground pressure excavators, it can also be done with a pretty light touch. And so again, these channels were dug just a few weeks ago, and you can see the amount of vegetation that was retained along the edges. You can see some large wood logs in these channels as well. And these are some other examples of some of our installed wood structures. And so again, some of these are intended to actually hold the bank together to stabilize the bank, but a lot of them are just intended for fish habitat. Particularly the root wads, they create a lot of hiding places for fish and juvenile fish in particular, which is a big goal for this project, to maximize the fish habitat value. So another big part of this project is, not only providing fish passage into the marsh, which will provide better fish passage into the creeks coming in, but also to improve fish passage at Sand Lake Road, where each of these three creeks cross. Here on the north, we have Renicky Creek. It's the largest creek that flows into the area. Belts Creek right in the center, and then No Name Creek at the far south end, which is adjacent and kind of flowing through a portion of Tierra del Mar. Renicky Creek is the top priority, again, because it is the largest stream. It has the highest potential for fish, and it is also the location where the roadway overtops a lot, and is the kind of highest priority for Tillamook County Public Works from an infrastructure perspective as well. Belts and No Name Creek are still in the works. We're designing those to a 30% design level right now, but there's no additional funding at this moment to take those forward. Krister might talk a little bit about plans to bring those forward in the future, but right now the 60% design includes the Sitka Sedge project, as I've just described, as well as the Renicky Creek culvert replacement, and I'll get into that in a little bit more detail here. So here's a couple views of Sand Lake Road and Renicky Creek. On the left here is its existing location. You can't see the culvert a lot of times. It's completely submerged. It's only 24 inches diameter, so a 2-foot pipe that's carrying this water across. And some of what you see there is erosion that's occurred when that water overtops the roadway. I don't know, I've had another photo of the road flooded out in that location, and but it overtops frequently. It gets plugged with debris, gravels, and needs cleaned out a lot, as well as just damages the roadway embankment. Here on the right side is actually another culvert that used to convey portions of Renegade Creek's flow across Sand Lake Road, and it completely is buried in gravels now. It's completely blocked. So getting a little bit into Renegade Creek's existing conditions and our design rationale here.
You can use the pointer on the screen.
Okay, I'll use the pointer here to help others see what I'm pointing at. So Renegade Creek is coming down out of this steep forested hillside from the east, kind of hits the flat area once it leaves the forest, flows and hits Sand Lake Road. This little pink circle here is actually that blocked culvert I just showed you, where flows used to cross the road there and flow out into one or more different channels that are located in the area. But now all flows flow down the roadside ditch to the low point in the roadway and crosses Sand Lake Road there. You know, a lot of what we've looked into is really trying to understand, you know, what's the best place to put a new bridge. And what we've gotten into here is kind of a deeper analysis of the hydrology and the geomorphology of just how sediment and water moves through the area. So we won't get too deeply into this, but what we've observed here in the bottom left here is existing LiDAR data from the area. And you can see this really distinctive pattern of this kind of sediment mound that kind of fans out in multiple directions. And what you see in the top image there is just a schematic representation of a feature called an alluvial fan. Again, this is where water is coming out of the steep hillside. It's carrying a lot of gravels. And once it hits the flat area, it drops those gravels out and it will deposit those gravels, and the channel has a tendency to move across that floodplain area. So we can really see in the LiDAR that is what we have here at Renegade Creek. And effectively, it's through, you know, years of modifications, Renegade Creek has kind of been pushed off the side of its alluvial fan. It stays relatively steep through there, and now where it kind of exits that area, it still flattens out and it still drops a lot of sediment. The reasons why the culverts block, the channels fill in, and creating a lot of maintenance issues. And now just to look back in time, again, as far back as we can look in 1939 here on the left, I'll point out a few features and then we can look at how this area has changed over time. So here on the right, this kind of white dashed squiggly line is where Renegade Creek currently is. And you can see all of this area to the south was forested, even as, you know, close back as the 1950s, all of this area was forested. It likely had channels flowing through this forested area, and as the creek would deposit sediment, the channels likely moved around. Out in the marsh, you can see again that I pointed out before, these really sinuous channels where Renegade Creek was probably flowing once it crossed the road, flowing out into some of these channels. These are also likely tidal channels like we're trying to create in some of those other images. And then here in the 1950s, you can see that these tidal channels got filled in. We don't see them anymore. So again, this is part of what we're trying to recreate by re-excavating new tidal channels across the site. You see in the 1950s, this channel pops up here. This is a channel, you know, effectively a drainage canal. It was built in conjunction with with the Belts Dike, and it routed Renegade Creek's flows kind of around the marsh and essentially around where the current parking lot trailhead area is, and flowed around the side of the setback dike through a culvert. You can see here as we move into 1970s, which actually looks pretty close to what it does today. For the most part, we see that canal channel, we see Reneke's current alignment, and you also see that all of this area was cleared, pasture, was likely cleared, plowed and smoothed out, and then maintained as pasture ever since. The parks actually do still mow that pasture now and then, and there's reports of the farmers that were doing that mowing where their equipment was getting torn up because there's so much gravel in the soil there. So again, more evidence that this is an area where gravel's been deposited over time. And this small little green triangle here is this patch of forested wetland that still exists today. And you'll see we're kind of playing on that in our design. So this is some hydraulic modeling, and this is about a 2-year flow event under existing conditions. And we see that not only does Reneke Creek, as it stays in its channel and hits the roadside ditch along Sand Lake Road, it overtops the roadway. Here you can see where water is overtopping the road, and the yellow and red colors, these are high velocities. So these are what cause erosion. So in addition, this whole kind of triangular area that forested wetland I pointed out is completely inundated. And even under current conditions, under those 2-year flows, we do have water popping out of Reneke Creek and making its way down to this low point. And in that forested wetland triangle, we see that there are still channels there because this area never got cleared and filled and modified. And so there's actually 4 existing channel flow pads, again, that we're kind of going to tie into. These are just a couple images of that forested wetland, and, really nice forest, skunk cabbage wetland, and actually, again, kind of hard to see with the vegetation, but there are channels still there that do convey water now and even groundwater late into the summer. So this is a view of our 60% design where we are planning to divert the creek across this floodplain area and reforest it as well. And I'll give you a glimpse at the planting plan. But what you see here, we're planning to fill the ditch along Sand Lake Road, raising up the road and putting in a new bridge, and filling a portion of Reneke Creek's channel to keep it from going back into that roadside ditch. So allowing it to flow across this portion of the alluvial fan, the floodplain, remeandering the creek in a more sinuous and natural form, and roughening up the floodplain to really try to recreate some of that forest floor structure that would have been there prior to clearing. So we're putting in a lot of large wood, both in the channels and on the floodplain, again, to just recreate that forest structure. And these are shown as berms here. So in addition to just excavating the channels, kind of creating some berms, creating some roughness that will block water and slow water down, allow gravels to deposit, and provide a multi-threaded channel, with side channels that, again, is more likely what existed prior to the conversion. This is a view of the revegetation plan, and what we're showing here are just 2 different hatch patterns or fill patterns. Within the wetland area, we're proposing a swamp vegetation, so a forested wetland. And then as we get out, this kind of green honeycomb hatch pattern is riparian forest. So again, trying to recreate what existed even as close back as the 1950s. These are a couple views from the structural engineer's plans, the new bridge, upsizing that small 2-foot diameter pipe to a 49-foot span bridge. And, that's a very drastic change and improvement. But that's really what we're trying to size that big enough so that it can convey the flows. It has room to handle gravel deposits, can pass debris and wood and anything that will go through there, and really be very low maintenance for the county long into the future, as well as raising the road up by about 2 feet in that location as well, so that there's more clearance beneath that bridge and it won't overtop anymore and will be a more reliable route for traffic. These are just a couple views of the roadway design and really just kind of giving you a glimpse. Again, these are construction drawings that you're getting a chance to just take a quick look at. But we're with that 2 feet of road raising, it requires us to raise about 650 feet of the roadway to raise up that low point. And here we're back to just the overview of the site and happy to take any questions and discuss. I think we do have one slide though. Maybe, oh yeah, I guess we're going to talk a little bit about construction costs. So as we've advanced the design towards construction, and TEP, Tillamook Estuaries Partnership, is raising money. They're trying to seek grant funding and actually are doing a great job at it. And there's a lot of good prospects for additional grant funds to come in. Right now, we're estimating that the Sitka Sedge Tidal Wetland Restoration Project with the pedestrian bridge, the setback dike, the dike breach, all of the channel work, and all of the construction logistics that go along with that, traffic control, access and staging, managing the water during that time, just approaching $10 million. The Renicky Creek Bridge replacement and stream realignment work is about another $3 million estimated. So with that, I don't know if Christopher wants to mention any of these. This is a view of some of the fundraising that has already occurred and is underway.
Sure. Thanks, Hunter. Yeah, so we've been pretty successful at raising money so far for this. I'm not gonna read through all this. I don't know why it's so tiny, but we currently are announcing that we just received a $6 million grant through NOAA. So that's gonna pay for the bulk of the construction inside the estuary. We have, like it shows up there, about $9.5 million pending from 3 other grant sources that we're waiting to hear from. One of them is a Tillamook County grant, one of them is through the Wild Salmon Center, and one of them is another TEP NIFWIF grant. So we raised a lot of money for this project. This stuff is really expensive. Construction costs have skyrocketed over the last 5-6 years. So we're in a pretty good position financially for this project to happen, and with pending things, we're feeling pretty good about. So it's pretty exciting. Yeah, that's all I got.
Yeah, and with that, we'll open it up to questions and comments, and curious of your thoughts. Thank you. Question from the front. Gonna put them on the mic. Yeah.
Well, very. So in terms of staging the whole thing, looking at the breach of the main, the current dike, the back dike,
Setback dike, yep.
the setback dike, and then Renicky Creek. What comes first? Make a difference?
It does. First, before we breach and open up the Belts dike, we need to have the setback dike completely finished. And so really, we're planning for this to be 2 years of construction. During that first year, the main goal is getting the setback dike built to its initial build height. And because we're building it over existing marsh and really deep, 100 feet deep of old marsh soils, when we place, 10 feet of fill, all of that's going to sink. And then we'll come back in the second year and top it back off. And so we will get a lot of that settlement out of the way in the first year. But that's actually why it's really necessary to build the setback dike over 2 years. So once the setback dike is fully completed, to its elevation, we'll build the tide gate structure in that second year after most of that settlement has occurred. And then once that whole system is completely ready to accept water, then we would breach the outer dike and construct the pedestrian bridge. Renicky could happen either time. And it's really independent of the rest of the work to some extent. Renicky Creek, it's above tides, and so it's not really influenced by a lot of what's going on down in the tidal water levels. And so it could actually happen in either year. And
construction and new bridge there. And what do you see as the ecological value of those and donating? Side, I mean, I don't know what Chris thinks, but you know, if we're gonna do road construction down there, you know, does it make sense to do all three?
Yeah.
At once, and is there that kind of value of donating to this project overall?
Belts Creek is also a a salmon bearing stream, has the potential to have salmon in it. And so Belts is also a high priority, just not as high a priority as Reneke, because you know, you don't even see Belts Creek when you drive across there right now. You know, there's a lot more room beneath the road. And so while again, we do still have plans to advance Belts Creek and No Name Creek culvert replacements in the future, they're just not part of the package right now. Depending on funding, they may come back into the mix, really still to be constructed in this same window, but that's not determined yet. No Name Creek, it also would be beneficial to provide a new opening there for drainage and for fish passage. ODFW considers it a trout only stream. And so not really potential for salmon habitat or salmon spawning. So slightly lower value for fish habitat, but you know, still ultimately is another area that we would want to open up to, you know, the maximum extent possible. And as far as, you know, does it make sense to build all three new culvert crossings at the same time? It could if we were planning to completely close Sand Lake Road during construction, but we're not. We're planning on keeping the road open during construction and building so that we have one lane open at all times. And so that will require widening out the embankment, kind of building a, you know, parallel road essentially, or widening the road so we can accommodate traffic while we work on half of the bridge. And then once one half of the bridge is complete, we'll shift traffic over to that side and build the second half of the bridge. And so if it was a situation where we just closed down Sand Lake Road altogether and built all three crossings at the same time, that would make a lot of sense. But since we need to do individual traffic bypass at each crossing, we can build them independently. Repeat? Sure. Yep.
I'll get after it. Thank you again for my presentation. I have two questions. Drastically different. One question that popped in my mind is, what's going to happen to the shoreline around Whalen Island, which is a protected area, a precious area? But because we're changing how much water is going to go where within the whole bay. So I'm kind of curious and just looked at what happened to the shoreline at that particular spot. My second question is kind of different, is will there be pedestrian traffic across the new dike as there is over the present time? So you can take it either way. Thank you.
I'll answer so the question was, what will this project do, or will it have any effect on the shoreline at Whalen Island? And no, we don't expect that it will. The water levels in all of Sand Lake are really driven by the ocean, or you know, the ocean tide, how fast it rises, how high it rises, and then the inlet from Sand Lake out to the ocean. That really controls how much water's, you know, getting in and how fast it's going out. While we're in the same estuary in the same Sand Lake system, we're very far away with respect to water movement. And effectively, you know, the water that's entering Belts Marsh and draining out, in the modeling that we've done, we don't see any change at all to the water circulation, how it's moving, the water levels. Again, the water levels themselves are really driven by how high does the ocean rise, you know, what are the stormwater inputs coming in. But that area will drain out independently from Sitka Sedge. And again, we don't expect any changes at Whalen Island, and have conducted hydraulic modeling to look at that. We do expect within Sand Lake, so where we're connecting our breach channel out to that existing channel that's still there that I mentioned, we will be having a lot more water pushing in and out of that channel every day. And so we would expect that channel there to maybe deepen and maybe have some changes in the immediate vicinity of the breach, but not as far out as where Whalen Island is. There's lots of other channels and other, channel pathways coming in. The bridge that provides access out to Whalen Island now, it has its own kind of drainage, incoming tide and drain out that occurs. And really that area, has a lot more influence on the area around Whalen Island than this project will.
How about-
Answer your question?
My second question was, foot traffic across the new dike for the public access to the beach across the new dike as there is on present dike.
And the question was, will there be pedestrian access on the new setback dike? And yep, would love to have Jason answer that in parts.
And good question there, Larry. Originally, we had a lot of back and forth on considering that, and a couple of things. One, the existing dike already brings people out into the wetlands and into the estuary there, so it wouldn't be adding too much to the recreational value that isn't already in place at Sitka Sedge. And then also two different factors, security of the muted tidal regulator. Do we really want to invite folks out there in that area? And then also access to the eastern part of the dike and onto the road. We don't want to really draw folks over to the that portion of the dike, like accessing the dike from Sand Lake Road from that area, because it's not going to be set up for that. And then also master plan considerations in there. During the master planning process, we didn't identify any developed area within the park for recreational use. So it would take changes to the master plan as well. Yes, no parking.
Yeah, exactly. That east end where the setback dike ties into Sand Lake Road is a pretty narrow portion of that roadway, and there's not really anywhere, for anybody to pull off and park, and we really wouldn't want to encourage people to park there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so there's an online question and it is related to beavers. What plans do you have for beavers who make a new dam?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, part of our plan and intent with this design of where we've located the setback dike, and I'm just flipping back to these slides. And so again, we've located the new setback dike so that it avoids that beaver dam. And right now that beaver dam it's been there ever since I've been involved with the project, and it's persisted that whole time. Basically what we're planning is behind the beaver dam, conditions aren't really going to change because of the setback dike and the water level setting that we're planning to use with the new tide gate structure. We're effectively giving the beavers that southern 10 acres to maintain it as beaver pond and freshwater wetland. We are also incorporating, and I didn't really mention this, but this is a good question to prompt that. We do have, concerns, I guess, about beaver debris and beaver damming blocking the new structure. And so we have been working with beaver specialists and ODFW to develop a beaver exclusion system and effectively fencing. What we're showing here in the red lines around the structure is basically fencing around the structure to keep beaver from moving in, from bringing in dam building material and blocking the structure, blocking the gate itself, or blocking that mechanical float system. And so we do expect beaver activity to continue after this project. There's a lot of research and evidence showing that beaver, they do exist and live in estuaries, in brackish water systems. Again, the area south of the setback dike will mostly remain as freshwater wetland, and beaver will continue to be able to build and maintain that dam. There's a beaver lodge present in the channels back there. And yeah, so I don't know if I directly answered the question of where to, them building new dams, but again, we do expect beaver activity to continue at this particular structure that would be sensitive to plugging. We're implementing measures to minimize and prevent that from happening. And also providing good access around this structure. Again, this view shows that the access road on top is wider here, 24 feet wide enough for an excavator to get in there and remove beaver debris and debris if necessary.
Any other questions?
Thank you. My name is Isabel. I'm representing the chair of the community. I have a question back to downstate and Mooney Creek. Not that Dutch Creek, Mooney Creek. In the project summary for the lower grant applications, it says the primary goals of this project are to replace fish taxi barriers with free salmon, Bering Creek, Ranger Creek, Dutch Creek, and Mooney Creek. That go into the salmon gate through the Mooney Dam. So with two of those being removed from the project, how does this impact the funding that we receive for this grant? Now you're saying that they're completely removed, they're separate, and you don't have any secure funding for it. So how does that impact the project that was explained?
Yeah, I think I can answer that. So one of the pending grants, so we essentially had a cap of $6 million for the NOAA grant that we've gotten. And so we had to remove elements of the project that we could potentially do later. And so Belts and No Name Creeks got separated and are in one of the pending grant applications that we have out right now. So the money is pending for those projects as well. They're kind of separated and will probably be done at a later date just because of the way the funding will work. So they're not really removed from the whole package of the project.
But they were funded in
No, not exactly. Yeah, those elements had to get pulled out. So
projects, the primary goal.
yeah, we had to pull Belts and No Name out because of the cap of how much we could apply for it, which is why we are applying for a separate funding source for those.
And in the project, the improvements with the dike breach, it also does, it takes that first step of providing access for fish from Sand Lake into Belts Marsh and then access to the 3 tributaries. So, a lot of times too, especially as you see the dollar amounts that are totaling up for this project and this package project, it's really hard to find single grants that can pay for the full project. And so a lot of times it does require raising multiple, funds through multiple grants to fund the full project. And, a lot of times when projects are being described in the narratives for the grant applications, we're describing the full project or the full vision for the area. I can't necessarily speak for the grant administrators or even Krista applying for those grants, but it's very common for the understanding that it will take multiple grants and multiple even phases of a project to achieve the full vision for the area.
Thank you. Goals and so you stated that one of the goals was virtually no elevated ground water and sharing water. So with all of this funding, it's got a $6 million funding from the facility. Is there any money in there for course monitoring of the groundwater with my donor or really? I've asked this question a number of times and been told no. So that when this project comes into place and the models don't play out, I'm sure it took everything doesn't. But what if it does increase the groundwater levels, and especially the north end of Sierra Madre to be hugely potentially impacted by this? What are the plans, and is there anything in that every single word that we're addressing in forest management.
Krista, do you recall any monitoring aspects of the last grant that touched on?
Not of the groundwater or groundwater. Yeah, that was not part of this grant. We do have required monitoring, different grants have different requirements, so we do have a monitoring plan, but it's mainly of the active restoration work that I'm taking place.
And I know,
We're still in place and still committed, so it would be easy to add that scope to some.
So can we say that a public meeting would be some sort of commitment to this forest monitoring? It's never been in the community to before, it's all been off the table completely. And I think that's a mistake, because if it doesn't get committed, the property, especially in the north, and it can be groups. We've done years and years of hydrological studies, we have that baseline of what happens with the groundwater and stormwater levels. I don't see why there wouldn't be any consideration for host monitoring, especially. I mean, this project went from last year was like 6-7 million, and now it's 10 million for the setback thing, and another $1.5 million for Rainy Creek. So that's like almost $13 million, and there should be something in there that protects the community and share the water, other than the type, other than the setback.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, and we can investigate that further. There are no decision makers in the room right here, so we'll have to talk about that.
and yeah, as Noel said, the groundwater wells that were established for the original hydrologic study and the groundwater study are still in place and could be monitored. At a single moment, they could be monitored as far as where that water level is, and then loggers could be installed as well to monitor continuously. And I know you're referring to, you're aware of the modeling and all the analysis that's been done, and in a nutshell, from the groundwater modeling and analysis, Pacific Groundwater Group was involved at that time, and they were doing the groundwater modeling. One of their key findings or key understandings of how groundwater levels are affected by the project or could be affected by the project, they were seeing in the modeling that the highest groundwater levels were really created by sustained water levels holding at that high elevation. And that's what exists under the existing conditions. And the image that Noel showed, or the animation that Noel showed, where under the existing conditions, when stormwater fills in and it just stays elevated for days and days at a time, that's really when the water's up high enough, long enough, that water level will propagate back into the groundwater south of there. With the alternative conditions, including the setback dike condition, that bathtub, it fills up, but it drains very quickly. And so we don't end up with that situation where water's just sitting there for days and days at a time. So just logically, that's some of the rationale supported by the modeling. And then again, I do agree that, those wells are still there. They can relatively easily be monitored. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Yep.
And one last comment, that's more of a comment than a question, is that given the magnitude of this project and that Chair Lamar is an adjacent property owner, I do think that monitoring needs to take place, because there should be no adverse impact to the community at all. We have no recourse. We said a couple of public meetings prior to this, a couple of years ago, that property owners would need to prove that their groundwater levels had increased for any recourse. Now, I don't know how any average property owner could do that, and so in a good faith effort from OBRD and TP, there has to be some commitment to the community for that.
Yeah. And I'll just quickly speak to the cost estimate. And as you noted, the estimated costs have increased from last time and from the previous time. And, part of that is adding elements into the project. Some of that channel excavation that I showed you, that was not included in the design at 30%. Through discussions with Tillamook Estuaries Partnership, and really, again, with this intent of maximizing the habitat value. And it's this is our one shot to get into this site and make the improvements while it is still disconnected from Sand Lake. And so taking that opportunity to try to maximize that habitat value. So there are some additional elements included since the last round that have increased the cost. And then, as Krister also kind of alluded to, construction costs have increased pretty dramatically over the last 5 years. And, since the 30% design estimate, we have a couple of other projects going on right now where we received contractors' bids on this similar type of work. And so as we took those more recent bids and applied them to this project, we've also seen the cost increase consistent with construction industry in general. Even just, quick search of just the industry-wide construction costs have gone up 40 to 50% or more, and on specific elements like steel and concrete and portion, elements that we're using for this project. Material prices have gone up, labor costs have gone up. So we think that at this point our estimates are realistic. We don't want to be too optimistic, especially as we're trying to round up funds for these projects. We don't want to estimate it at 6 million and then the bids come in and they're 9 million and we're trying to figure out how to fund the rest of the money. And so we are trying to be relatively conservative with the estimates at this point.
Okay, we have another online question. This one says, regarding the Sand Lake Road changes, are there allowances for bike passage, making a wider shoulder of the road to accommodate the Oregon Coast Bikeway? And then they also go on to say, I support the project and congratulate the team for their fundraising efforts. As a user of Sitka Sedge Trails, I say bravo.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I'd love to have Chris.
Yeah, I think this is a good one for me. So the bridge is wide. It has 4-foot shoulders on either side. So every time we put bridge in, because we're 75 years, you try to make the bridges wider to accommodate maybe for future widening that takes place out. So they are wider bridges than would be the early skinny, so there's room for some bikes that have out there. I wanted to add a little bit on the Rankin bridge side of that. So Krista was able to get that funded 2.5%. We did for design, not for construction, for design. So we did apply for federal highway like ordinance and passage money. That does require a 20% local match. So when you look at a $3 million project plus, it does require the county to kick in or local match to the county, a non-federal match of 20%, so $600,000. So we pushed, we said, let's double down on Reneke. Reneke is the primary, most important location for us from a road department point of view. Belts and no name bar, it would be nice to get those replaced. But from a structural point of view, they're not as critical as Reneke. Reneke is also unique in that it does take a requirement of the entire street, the entire ridge right above it to be realigned and get it out of the woodside ditch. So Reneke was, from the road department, the most important. It also has the most tax. So yes, provide it.
Yeah, and the roadway design there, as Chris mentioned, the bridge itself will be wider than the existing roadway, and the roadway design does implement shoulders, which there really aren't any shoulders along the road, particularly in that location. So there will be some widening, but not for the entire length of the roadway.
Any other questions? Comments?
You may have mentioned this already. How tall will the new step bank estimated to be?
Yeah, well, the existing dike has low points of about 12 feet. And so, even with the highest tides that we experience today, it's just getting to the point where it could start to overtop. I also mentioned settlement that's going to occur, and even after the dike's completed, over the next 50 years, 100 years, it will continue to settle. And so we want to build it extra high so that not only it has freeboard or enough, at least 3 feet of freeboard over the current high water levels, as well as to allow for sea level rise in the future, and to accommodate some settlement. And so we're planning to build it to an elevation of 17 feet. Yes. Yeah. So 5 feet over the current high water levels. Yeah, so that it's set up for sea level rise in the future and can accommodate some settlement and still have, 3 to 4 feet of freeboard.
Anyone else? In person or online? So we currently have two federal highway DOT projects awarded to us. One of I anticipate if we are awarded, the money will be available for the summer of 2027. Coincidentally, ODOT is working with Federal Highway to rebuild the Sand Lake Road Slide. Currently, that is also scheduled for the summer of 2027, so you'll see a fair amount of improvements on Sand Lake Road during the summer, hopefully ready with it.
Yeah. Thank you for your time, everybody, and interest in the project. Really appreciate it, and all the great questions as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
You like literally.